There is a man who says he cannot sleep, but what really keeps him awake is the screen that might light up and finally choose him. He calls it love, because that sounds noble, but his body knows another truth. He is living inside a private state of emergency. Every silence becomes a courtroom, every delayed reply becomes evidence, and every tiny crumb of warmth feels powerful enough to cancel the pain. He studies punctuation like prophecy, replays old calls like scripture, and builds entire futures from messages that would look empty to a healthy mind. The trap is not that she gives nothing. The trap is that she gives just enough to keep his hope bleeding forward. So he waits again, phone in hand, pride on the floor, telling himself patience is maturity while his nervous system learns obedience. Yet he does not realize that longing can become a leash when another person controls the distance, the timing, and the emotional oxygen. What he mistakes for a rare connection is often a pattern older than romance, darker than chemistry, and much more strategic than desire. Because real love may be deep, but it does not keep a man starving just to make his next sip of affection feel sacred. If your peace disappears between their messages, you are not standing inside security. You are standing inside a schedule designed by uncertainty. And uncertainty is intoxicating precisely because the mind hates open loops and will spend enormous energy trying to close what was never meant to close. This is why a grown man can become emotionally small, checking a lock screen like a child listening for footsteps outside a closed door. That he starts bargaining with ghosts, promising to be calmer, easier, less intense, less honest, less real. If that will make her stay consistent, that is the first betrayal. Not that she confuses him, but that he begins trimming away his own truth to make confusion tolerable. He tells himself he is loyal, but often loyalty is the beautiful name people give to fear when they are afraid to leave. He tells himself he loves deeply, yet depth is not measured by how much pain you can endure before admitting the situation is degrading you. He tells himself she is complicated, wounded, confused, busy, scared, and misunderstood, because those stories feel safer than accepting deliberate inconsistency. Yes, the mind would rather invent tragic poetry than face the humiliating possibility that someone enjoys access to him more than responsibility for him. So he keeps decoding signals instead of reading patterns, because signals let hope survive while patterns usually deliver a verdict he does not want. A signal says maybe, and maybe is the drug. A pattern says no, and no demands grief, dignity, and an exit. This is where intermittent reinforcement enters like a silent dealer, handing out unpredictable reward until the waiting itself becomes an addiction. When affection arrives randomly, the brain clings harder, not softer, because unpredictability trains obsession more efficiently than steady kindness ever could. Casinos know this, algorithms know this, manipulators know this. And wounded hearts learn it too late because the prize feels like intimacy. He is not chasing her actual presence anymore. He is chasing the chemical release that follows the ache, the relief after deprivation, the breath after drowning. That is why the smallest message can shake his whole body, not because it is profound, but because withdrawal has made crumbs feel monumental. He thinks he misses her, but often he misses the end of panic, the temporary sedation, the brief permission to stop bracing. And that is one of the darkest confusions in modern attachment. People call it love when their nervous system is simply negotiating for relief. The body cannot always tell the difference between chemistry and threat, especially when old wounds taught it that closeness usually arrives carrying risk. So the man confuses anxiety with passion, hypervigilance with devotion, emotional hunger with destiny, and self-abandonment with proof that he cares enough. He does not notice how often his love story begins to resemble surveillance, exhaustion, secrecy, and private rehearsals for conversations that never happen. When someone keeps you emotionally off balance, your mind becomes easier to manage because confused people over-explain, over-give, and doubt their own instincts. They do not need chains when they can control your interpretation. They only need to make you question whether the pain is your fault. Then you become your own captor, defending their inconsistency, correcting your own anger, and apologizing for the damage their behavior keeps creating. This is why manipulation often looks polite on the surface. Because the deepest control does not shout first. It edits your reality quietly. One day she is warm enough to reopen the wound, the next day distant enough to make him chase, and the rhythm itself trains dependence. Every return feels like redemption, so he forgets the injury and clings to the reunion, which is exactly how the cycle protects itself. He begins measuring the relationship by peaks instead of baseline, by intensity instead of stability, by hope instead of reality, by fantasy instead of pattern. And because the peaks are rare, they become sacred, which means he tolerates valleys that would have horrified him at the beginning. Scarcity creates distortion, and distorted value makes people worship what they would normally reject if it were offered consistently and without mystery. This is not romance becoming deeper. Yet this is deprivation, increasing the emotional price of contact until ordinary attention starts feeling like salvation. Somewhere inside him lives an older wound that whispers, "Stay patient, stay useful, stay quiet, and maybe this time love will stop leaving." That is why trauma bonding is so cruel. It fuses pain with attachment until the very person hurting you begins to feel like medicine. The nervous system remembers relief more vividly than dignity when abandonment fear has been rehearsed since childhood under softer names. Maybe it was a distant parent, a moody home, affection that appeared unpredictably, or praise that arrived only after self-erasure and performance. So now the man does something tragic and familiar. He tries to win consistency from inconsistency as if better effort could civilize chaos. But he works harder precisely where he should be observing harder, because anxious attachment confuses effort with leverage and devotion with influence. But effort cannot heal a game built on asymmetry, where one person gets emotional access while the other pays in time, focus, and self-respect. Notice how he slowly loses his center. Friends see less of him, work receives a fractured mind, and sleep becomes a negotiation with hope. He says he is just waiting for clarity, but clarity is already spoken through repetition. It is his fantasy that keeps filing appeals. Repetition is the real confession of any bond, because patterns tell the truth that charming explanations are always trying to postpone. A healthy connection can survive honesty, but a manipulative dynamic depends on fog. Because fog delays decisions and keeps power concentrated in one hand. That is why he feels strangely guilty whenever he wants something simple, like consistency, directness, warmth, or basic emotional accountability. Manipulation trains shame around normal needs, until asking for clarity feels aggressive and accepting confusion feels mature, spiritual, patient, and superior. But maturity is not the art of enduring ambiguity forever. Maturity is knowing when ambiguity has become a weapon pointed at your identity. Carl Jung warned that what remains unconscious directs our lives, and we end up calling that hidden driver fate because we never named it. In this story, the hidden driver is not deep romance. It is an old wound steering the man toward familiar instability and calling it home. Picture Jung's severe portrait on a dark wall. Not as decoration, but as a witness to the shadow this man keeps mistaking for love. The shadow here is not evil in a theatrical sense. It is the abandoned part of him begging for rescue through the wrong person. Because when the shadow stays unseen, a man will chase whoever activates it, believing activation means meaning and pain means significance. That is how unresolved abandonment becomes attraction, how chaos becomes magnetism, and how familiar suffering begins wearing the face of destiny. He thinks he is choosing her, but often he is being chosen by his own unfinished history, his own fear, his own hunger. And unfinished history is persuasive because it does not ask what is good, it only asks what feels recognizable to the wound. So the man keeps returning to the same emotional room, hoping this version will end differently. While the architecture remains exactly the same, the walls may wear a new face, a new voice, a new perfume, but the mechanism underneath still runs on uncertainty and self-loss. This is why insight matters more than closure, because closure depends on them, but insight returns power to the person who can finally see. Once he sees the pattern clearly, the magic starts dying, because spells survive on confusion and collapse when named without apology. Naming it does not make him bitter. It makes him accurate, and accuracy is often the first mercy a broken heart can receive. He can say, "This is intermittent reinforcement, not intimacy. This is trauma bonding, not soul recognition. This is anxiety, not sacred depth." That sentence alone can save months, even years. But because language redraws reality and breaks the trance that silence was protecting. The point is not to demonize every complicated person. The point is to stop romanticizing the effect they have on your nervous system. If someone repeatedly destabilizes you, withholds clarity, rewards chasing, and returns only when you begin letting go, the pattern is speaking loudly. And the more loudly a pattern speaks, the more dangerous it becomes to keep interpreting it through isolated moments of tenderness. A starving man cannot evaluate food wisely, and an emotionally deprived man cannot evaluate mixed signals clearly while he is still craving rescue. So before he asks whether she loves him, he must ask a harsher question. Who has he become while waiting to be chosen? Has he become smaller, quieter, more apologetic, more obsessive? He is less creative, less rested, and less connected to the parts of himself that lead. If the relationship keeps costing him his center, then what he is preserving is not love. It is access to a wound. And wounds do not heal by being reopened in prettier packaging. They heal when the pattern stops receiving devotion, excuses, and repeated permission. This is the turning point where a man must choose between temporary relief and long-term dignity, because he cannot keep bowing to both. Dignity often feels colder in the beginning because it removes the fantasy before it delivers peace, and withdrawal always protests the truth. That protest is not proof you made the wrong choice. It is proof your system was dependent on unpredictability and is learning another rhythm. Our healing begins when he stops asking how to win her certainty and starts asking why chaos felt intimate in the first place. That question does not weaken him. It returns him to authorship because the man who understands his hunger can stop mistaking bait for love. He may need silence, distance, journaling, therapy, honest friends, and hard days without contact because clarity rarely arrives in the middle of exposure. Every time he refuses to check, refuses to chase, refuses to decode crumbs, he is not losing love. He is breaking conditioning. Every time he lets the silence speak for itself, he is removing makeup from the pattern and allowing reality to show its unedited face. This is where self-worth stops being a slogan and becomes behavior, because worth is proven by what a man no longer negotiates over. Now, he no longer bargains for basic reciprocity, no longer auditions for reassurance, and no longer mistakes confusion for complexity or avoidance for depth. He starts trusting the baseline more than the peak, the pattern more than the promise, the body more than the fantasy. He notices whether calm is possible around them, whether honesty is safe, whether affection is steady, and whether respect survives inconvenient truth. Those questions are powerful because manipulators thrive in emotional weather, but they struggle when a person begins using standards instead of longing. Standards are not walls built by bitterness, they are doors built by wisdom, allowing the right people in and keeping corrosion outside. Carl Jung's portrait belongs here again, not as hero worship, but as a reminder that shadow work begins where romantic illusion finally loses its glamour. To do shadow work in this case means admitting the painful truth that part of him preferred familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. Unfamiliar peace can feel empty at first because no drama is singing through the veins and no suspense is telling the ego it matters. But peace is not empty. Peace is spacious, and spaciousness feels strange only to people who have been trained to equate tension with aliveness. The man who survives this lesson does not become colder. He becomes clearer, and clarity allows warmth to go where it is returned. He stops worshiping potential, stops financing ambiguity with his energy, and stops calling emotional instability a profound spiritual bond that only flatters suffering. He learns that real connection does not require detective work, emotional gambling, or the constant swallowing of needs just to keep the door open. Real love may challenge you, but it does not repeatedly scramble your nervous system and then ask you to call the damage intimacy. Real love can hold warmth and clarity in the same room, which means it does not need confusion to feel deep to you. The moment he understands that, he stops trying to be chosen by chaos and starts choosing environments that protect his mind and heart. That is the adult move so many wounded people postpone. Not finding someone impossible to lose, but becoming someone impossible to manipulate cheaply. When he leaves the cycle, he does not lose a soulmate. He loses a training program that was teaching him to betray himself. And once that lesson ends, yet his energy comes home, his sleep deepens, his work sharpens, and his personality stops orbiting another person's silence. He can grieve what he wanted, bless what taught him, and still walk away without reopening the court case in his mind. Because the deepest freedom is not forcing someone to love you well. It is no longer needing inconsistent people to confirm your worth. And the man who learns that becomes difficult to control because he no longer confuses longing with loyalty or pain with meaning. He becomes quieter in the best way, not suppressed, but settled, like a throne reclaimed after a long occupation by doubt and fear. So if you are waiting for a message that keeps deciding your mood, remember this. Addiction to relief can disguise itself as love. And if tonight you choose dignity over another cycle of suspense, you are not losing romance. You are ending a quiet form of control. May you protect your inner throne, keep your health, and never again call emotional deprivation by the beautiful and costly name of love. And if this opened your eyes, stay with this channel, because the next truth may protect your peace before another shadow learns your name.